Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Gartner Live. I'm Rose McRae. I'm a Senior Director of Research here at Gartner. And today we're going to talk about quiet hiring and take some of your questions. Let's start with a really obvious one. What is quiet hiring? Well, quiet hiring is when an organization goes about acquiring the skills and capabilities that it needs without necessarily adding full-time headcount. That doesn't mean that labor costs don't go up, just that they wouldn't go up as much as they would if they were adding new full-time headcount. This might involve the organization redeploying employees within the organization from one part of the business to another. Say, moving some HR and marketing analysts from their HR and marketing roles to open data science positions, and then either reskilling or upskilling folks so that they could do that work, or maybe redesigning the role a little bit and bringing in contractors to do some of the more complex parts that the HR and marketing analysts otherwise would need to be reskilled for. In all of this, whether you are hiring contractors or gig workers, or if you are looking at moving your employees around the organization in order to meet your strategic goals and your top priorities, you need to compensate the employees. These are employees that you consider so valuable, you want to move them from one part of the business to the other. Therefore, you need to compensate them in some way, whether that's raises or bonuses or more PTO or more flexibility, something like that. And for an employee, being moved from one part of the business to another as part of quiet hiring is because you're an incredible strategic value to the organization. And that should be reflected in how the organization treats you. This also means that organizations have to deprioritize whatever they've moved people away from in order to focus on particular parts of the business. So let's go ahead and get to your questions. First up here, I have a great question from Soheb, which is, what are the advantages of quiet hiring? Well, the advantages for employees are that it is an opportunity for you as a worker to get a chance to build some new skills that might be very competitive long-term. It also gives you a chance to potentially learn about different parts of the business in a way that will make you more competitive for a leadership role later, and can potentially be a really great way to start doing some serious career pathing in terms of, this gives me exposure to this part of the business, and then here's another part of the business that I could join and then move in a particular direction. So it can open up some really great doors. Plus, you're more competitive in general, whether you use the skills that are being gained and the experience that's being gained at your organization, or you eventually leave for another organization. You've gotten some cool knowledge built in there. For the organization, it allows them to continue to try to meet their strategic goals or to continue to operate. When you think about it, if you don't have enough talent to perform the way you need to, and your choices are burn out the staff you have, and then lose them, because again, still a talent shortage. There's still quite a lot of turnover, and there's going to be fairly permanently high attrition. So this is a long-term risk for organizations. Or not reach your goals, or reach your goals by moving people around within the organization. You're going to choose the latter if it's ever possible. So in order to continue to be competitive in the market when it comes to how stakeholders and even stockholders might see you, this is far preferable to having to say, well, we're going to reevaluate our growth goals for the year because we simply can't hire what we need in key roles. This is definitely an advantage for an organization. And bonus, we have really good research that shows that when you increase the employability of your employees, their intent to stay increases. So this might sound counterintuitive, that by making your employees more competitive in the labor market, you actually make it easier for them to stay with you. But because it shows an investment in your employees and it is a demonstration of how much you value them, it's actually a way to increase engagement, which is pretty exciting. So that's something we're pretty excited about in terms of some of the advantages that can come with quiet hiring. And it's certainly preferable to a strategy of mass layoffs because you realize that you have to shut down an entire division because you don't have the talent you need for it. So let's look at our next question coming in here. This one's from Simone. Does quiet hiring increase or decrease the appeal of the company for outside hires? That's a really great question. And the answer is a little bit of a mixed bag, actually. So it increases the appeal because an organization is going to seem like they are being explicit about what matters, and they're demonstrating that they are willing to move people to where they need to go in order to create the pathway needed to hit their strategic goals for the year. So that's some nice stability in terms of the organization itself. But not everyone wants to be in a role that might change. And while you should absolutely at every organization have the ability to say, no, thank you, I would rather not move over to this part of the business. And if you so choose and the organization isn't happy with that, that is where there's sort of a question of, would they force you? Would you quit? How would you want to handle that? And so there's a little bit of anxiety for people who are going to organizations that are doing a lot of quiet hiring. How stable is my job? What does the future look like here? And that's where organizations that have made another commitment will be really, really compelling. So if you've made a commitment that if we need to move people around, we will ask and try to match you with not just the best fit for your skills, but wherever possible, also the best fit for your career goals long term, that's much more compelling. But if it's just, we're going to move you wherever we need you, and we'll try to compensate you accordingly, but if you don't like it, bye, that's not super engaging. We actually see the same thing when it comes to how frontline workers and early career workers might be impacted by technology. So if you're investing a lot in automation that is going to replace tasks, your employees are not stupid people. They're looking at that and saying, okay, does that mean that my role is going away? Now, in some cases, you're replacing tasks because you have such a shortage of talent. A really good example of this is nursing, that you're just desperate to have whoever you can. So if you can reduce some of the tasks, then there's not quite as much of a talent shortage, less of a problem. If the tasks you're reducing mean that you don't need a group of people anymore, people get anxious about that. But we found that the organizations who are actually really clear about what their plan is there and say, yes, we actually are investing in technology that means in 2 years, 90% of this role will not exist anymore. But we are committed to moving you within our organization and redeploying you. That's a lot more engaging. Or, as sometimes happens, this is going to happen. We recognize that we don't plan on having 90% of these roles in 2 years, and we're going to have to pay more competitively in order to recruit for this group. So those are sort of two paths that organizations can take. But there's absolutely an employment brand risk if it's done in a draconian or controlling way when it comes to quiet hiring. And then Karen asks, is the movement of the employee typically temporary or permanent? That depends. Typically temporary. That's how we're conceiving of quiet hiring as a concept. But if an employee wanted to make it permanent, I'm sure the organization would be open to that conversation, because internal talent who have not only the skills and abilities to do the job, but knowledge of the organization and demonstrated performance in a role, that's really appealing. So in a lot of cases, organizations will be open to, if not moving someone into that role permanently, then at least a similar role, maybe one that has permanent possibility if this is like, say, short-term Tiger Team sprint project. But it also, in most cases, could be temporary. This is something we need right now, and we won't need it again in the future. Or if we do, we're going to use a different team. We're rotating people in because maybe it's a role that a lot of people aren't interested in doing, or we're not able to hire as fast as we want, but it's fairly interchangeable. One example is there's an airline that for baggage handlers has been offering anyone in an office job the opportunity to rotate in for compensation and after training, of course. But they're doing just a wide variety. Anyone they can reach who's interested in the role or interested in the role and the additional compensation, because they know that there's not a lot of value in making one team the designated replacement for this role. So let's look and see what else we've got here. Is there a concern that quiet hiring will fuel the cycle of rage applying and quiet quitting? Oh, I love all these terms in here. So we've got lots of buzzwords. Let's talk about them a little bit. Quiet quitting is when people do not going above and beyond. So just doing the work. And what we've been articulating this as in opposition to quiet hiring is if quiet quitting is ultimately for the organization a way that they lose skills and abilities without their headcount going down. Because employees who are not going above and beyond, but who were in the past or who were expected to go above and beyond, that's skills and capabilities that are being lost. And another thing that's happening, this rage applying, which I love as a word. Rage applying is when people are like, oh, I hate my boss. That horrible interaction I just had. I'm applying for jobs. I'm going to apply and apply and apply. And in some cases, organizations have made it so easy for you to apply that it's very easy to do rage applying as well. Will quiet hiring fuel that cycle? Not if it's done well. If quiet hiring is done well, it's great. If quiet hiring is done well, it's engaging for everyone involved. It's even inspiring. It gives people enthusiasm about the future of the organization. But if quiet hiring is done poorly, then we're looking at something else. Then we're looking at something that in many cases might not even be quiet hiring. So if you are not compensating your employees for the big changes that they're making, that's not quiet hiring. If you aren't giving people options about what their long-term future will be at the organization, that may not really give people a desire to stay at your organization. So yeah, you may get some rage applying, you might get some quiet quitting. But the thing about the quiet quitting is if you are quiet hired, if you were moved into another part of the business or you were asked to take on a brand new set of responsibilities specifically because the organization is prioritizing them and needs you to do them, what that's going to give you is like a really clear set of information about what's strategically important for that. So, and how much your organization values you. Because if an organization says, your skills are important, we want you to move over and do this, they value you. They don't want to lose you. So if the organization doesn't make that clear and it leads to quiet quitting, they haven't done quiet hiring correctly. And then that might lead to rage applying. Sure, that absolutely could be a risk, but it's more of a risk in terms of, are you treating your employees like they are whole people, like you value their expertise and their skills, like you want them at your organization, and that's why you're moving them over to do something that's incredibly critical to either your continued operations or your strategic goals? Or are you treating people like they are cogs in a machine who you do not value? Then yes, you may get more quiet quitting and rage applying. But generally, when people are given stretch assignments and told that they are part of a strategic goal that the organization has, so that their new assignment is given in the context of the strategic goals of the organization, usually people are very enthusiastic and are very high performers. And usually they're also compensated accordingly. So we've got one last question here from Mike. And it's actually two questions, so we'll take both of them. So where would companies start if they wanted to start gathering skills of their current employees? And that's a great question because it's really hard. This is something that we in Gartner's HR practice talk to HR leaders about all the time, because we highly recommend that you do your workforce planning in a skills-based way rather than roles-based. But the first challenge is, how do I even figure out what skills are in my current workforce? There are a wide variety of options. If you want to go super high tech, there's actually AI out there that will do it for you, at least theoretically. There are vendors that offer this. If you're going a little more low tech direction, you could ask your employees to share what skills they have. You could sort of at a medium tech level, actually look at what applications employees are using and where those are most commonly used, which is very imperfect, but especially if you're looking heavily at specific softwares that you're looking at as a priority, that can be kind of useful. You can also use job description data, even though it might be very outdated for some of your employees. Or you could use LinkedIn profiles. There are vendors that will allow you to buy your employees' LinkedIn profile data. Again, that may be imperfect, but that gets you started with something that can be your base. And then as you share to employees how this is going to be used, they may be able to provide more information that'll help you do it even better. And then the next question from Mike here is, with all of the layoffs going on, have you heard of any companies using quiet hiring to repurpose potentially employees targeted for layoff to other parts of the business that could use their skills? And the answer is sometimes yes. So not within the tech sector specifically has this come up a lot, though I'm sure there's a little bit of it. But part of that is because the tech sector has been growing so enormously that if you look at growth for one of the companies that's done layoffs recently in the tech sector, the percentage of employees laid off feels so large, and it's certainly obviously seriously impactful for the employees who are affected and their families. But the percent of employees who are laid off is generally not that much of the actual organization, and particularly not that much even of the growth they've done in the last 3 years. So they're small percentages but they feel very large. But with layoffs in general and the general anxiety around layoffs, so moving out of the tech sector just more broadly, companies using quiet hiring to repurpose. So we would actually call that in general redeployment, whether it is done as quiet hiring or more strategically. There are many organizations that, whether layoffs are due to economic circumstances or the market changing or an evolution in the business strategy, sometimes you realize that there's a part of the business that you no longer need working for you. What do you do with those folks? Well, they have all sorts of institutional knowledge that can be incredibly helpful. And in many cases, organizations have a employee value proposition, so why you should work for them, that is centered on, we care about our employees and we have a commitment to them. And in that case, redeployment is a wonderful option. In fact, it's the first option I recommend before looking at layoffs. Redeployment is essentially quiet hiring, but permanent, and quiet hiring with an early anticipation that what you do may involve reskilling. So this means saying, okay, we're going to move these folks over here to this other part of the business. This is a growing part of the business. We're really excited to have them. Here are the skills we're going to need to develop in them. And it might be the entirety of an affected workforce, or it might just be a percentage. It depends on what an organization is doing and how they're able to make these transitions. Other things that we've seen have been organizations that are making layoffs redeploying talent actually to a talent partner, so to another organization that they know that needs talent. And that worked actually really well for some organizations during the pandemic. I know, for instance, it was publicly written about that Hilton and CVS had a partnership like this. So there are a variety of ways for organizations to do it, but quiet hiring and redeployment go hand in hand. I generally think of redeployment as more permanent, or at least long-term, than quiet hiring might be, but it is, they are related to each other, absolutely. All right, I think that's everything we have. So thank you all very much for joining. I really appreciate it. And if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are.